Well, today I'm going to talk about I find a very interesting subject. And after this, later on, we're going to have a Bible study. So this may whet your appetite for the Bible study. And I have to tell you that there's a man I really enjoy listening to, one of the best teachers I've ever heard. His name is Daniel Joseph. And he is right now he's going through the Ten Commandments. And I think he's up to like part 35 or 36. But he's very thorough. And he adds a lot of interesting information, a lot of historical information. So today, if you would turn to Romans chapter 15 and verse 4. Romans 15 and verse 4. Which says, "For whatsoever things were written aforetime were written for our learning, that we through patience and comfort of the Scriptures might have hope." A lot of those great stories in what we call the Old Testament are there for our edification, are there to prepare us for something. If you would turn to Exodus chapter 20. And a lot of times at this time of the year, it's a time of self-examination. And of course, one of the greatest things you can use is God's law, God's commandments. And we're going to read Exodus 20, verses 1 through 6. "And God spoke all these words, saying, I am the Lord thy God, which have brought thee out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image, or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. Thou shalt not bow down thyself to them, nor serve them. For I, the Lord thy God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children unto the third and fourth generation of them that hate me, and showing mercy unto thousands of them that love me and keep my commandments." You can see just in those first two commandments, there's a connection between loving God and obeying Him, and hating Him and disobeying Him. The second commandment here, I grew up in the Roman Catholic Church, and they kind of do away with that commandment and split the coveting commandment into two. And for sure, one of the reasons there were a lot of idols and images in that belief. I remember I used to talk with my mom. She said, "We don't really worship them." I said, "Mom, I was an altar boy. Can you believe that?" I carried them in processions. I watched people kneel in front of them. I watched people light candles in front of them and pray them, and very fondly using them in their religious worship. Clearly, it's something against what our Creator wants us to do. Well, we're going to take a look today at something that's in God's Word in the Old Testament, and it ties directly to the New Testament. Matter of fact, it ties to us today, and that's in the book of Daniel. Daniel chapter 2. I'm just going to read two scriptures out of Daniel chapter 2, and then we're going to go to Daniel 3. Daniel chapter 2. And before, I didn't see this. I was surprised when I must have read over it many times. But at first I didn't catch it. Daniel chapter 2 and verse 46, which said, "This was after Daniel told Nebuchadnezzar about his dream, about the image, the head of gold, silver, brass, and iron. And he explained it to them about certain kingdoms that were going to come on the earth. And after this was Nebuchadnezzar's response to Daniel. Then the king Nebuchadnezzar fell upon his face and worshipped Daniel." I never saw that before, that he actually worshipped Daniel. and commanded that they should offer an oblation and sweet odors unto him. A lot of times you'll see that in the New Testament, even with the Apostle John. He would say, don't do that. I'm a man like you. I think Peter did the same thing. But here was something that Nebuchadnezzar was so amazed by, this power that he saw. And Daniel explained to him, there's a God that reveals secrets and dreams. And in verse 49, I thought this was interesting. Then Daniel requested of the king, and he set Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the affairs of the province of Babylon. But Daniel sat in the gate of the king. You notice most of the time we hear about these three guys. You're hearing them by their pagan names. That's not their real names. Their names are Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael. If you listen to their real names, Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael, those endings are godly names, okay? And of course, once a pagan king gets his way, he renames. And you notice how God renames. Many famous people in the Bible were renamed by our Father and of course, by Jesus Christ. But here you have an example of a monster of a man. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to go to Daniel chapter 3 and verse 1. It says, Nebuchadnezzar the king made an image of gold, whose height was 60 cubits, the breadth thereof 6 cubits. He set it up in the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Now, one thing that's not mentioned here, but is mentioned in the Septuagint is the Greek translation of the Hebrew Scriptures. It tells you in the 18th year of King Nebuchadnezzar, this is when this happened, okay? And what happened in the 18th year of King Nebuchadnezzar? If you turn to Jeremiah chapter 32, Jeremiah 32, and verses 1 and 2, the word that came to Jeremiah from the Lord in the 10th year of Zedekiah, king of Judah, which was the 18th year of Nebuchadnezzar. For then the king of Babylon, his army, besieged Jerusalem, and Jeremiah the prophet was shut up in the court of the prison, which was in the king of Judah's house. Okay, and then one other verse, chapter 52, Jeremiah 52. And verse 29. In the 18th year of Nebuchadnezzar, he carried away captive from Jerusalem 832 persons. And that came in waves after that. But Jerusalem was being sacked. And to show what a monster this guy was, Zedekiah was the king at the time. And the last thing he did, he killed his sons in front of him. And then after he killed his sons, he tore his eyes out. A monster of a guy. So the people you're looking at here, when you're reading about Daniel and you're reading about Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael, you're reading about people that were taken, talented people, because he took the talented people first. And what he was going to do, he was going to re-educate them in the Babylonian way. So we're reading a story here about an image that he makes. Do not confuse this image with the image of the dream. Remember, the dream had 4 different metals. This here is just something that is 60 feet high. 60 cubits high, 6 cubits wide. All right, that's in our terms, that's 90 feet high and 9 feet wide at the base, and it was covered in gold. And he said that everybody at that time in that area, at the certain sound, they all had to bow down and worship this. It wasn't something crazy that he requested of them. He didn't say, give me your children, give me all your money, give me your homes. It was a simple request. And all you had to do was follow that and you would have been okay. This is going to tie into us later on, where we're heading with this. By the way, Nebuchadnezzar was called Melech of Melechim, which means the King of Kings. Now, we all know who the King of Kings is. So here's a guy that actually wants worship. And the bottom line is, he's asking these three guys here to worship his image. And these three guys know that first and second commandment that we just read a little while ago. And it's interesting how they respond. But he was definitely a tyrant, an evil Antichrist type. And you're going to see as we go through some of the history, the message is the same all throughout history, the history of the Bible. The message from the beginning to the end is keep God's commandments, all right? And the adversary is saying, no, you don't need to do that. So we have to be prepared as we are heading into some pretty interesting times. So that being 60 cubits by 6 cubits, it's a 10-to-1 ratio. And most people feel it was, any answers? An obelisk. Do you know what obelisks are? Well, obelisks are a pagan symbol, and they came from Egypt, and they were to worship the so-called sun god. The 10-to-1 ratio, probably the most famous one you may know, is a Washington Monument. That's 555 feet by 55 feet. Yeah. And I'm sure, I'm sure, if George Washington would be brought back to life right now and say, by the way, George, we put this up in your honor. And he was a very spiritually minded guy. And it's a phallic symbol, all right? And it's tied to fertility. It's tied to the so-called sun god of Egypt. And not only that, we made quarters after you. We put your molten image on here. I'm pretty sure he would be upset over what has been done in his name. There are different obelisks around. You know, a lot of times you'll see them in cemeteries around here. But some of the more famous ones, there's one at the Vatican. That one that's at the Vatican is over 4,500 years old. That came from Egypt. And guess who brought it there? Caligula. He brought it there. Wow. And later on, in the 1800s, there was a man that put up these giant columns around it. So when you come over to Italy, you come to Rome, you'll come into these columns, and then the big obelisk is in the middle of that. Now you might be thinking, what is that doing at a place of so-called Christian religious worship? By the way, the columns that he put around there, those are called the maternal arms of the Mother Church, which is another interesting little piece of information. But not only does the Vatican have those obelisks, some of the 3 famous obelisks that have been put in major cities at the time of Napoleon, during his wars, they went down to Egypt, and he brought one to Paris. And I think Queen Victoria arranged for one to come to London. And I think one of the Vandergrifts brought one to New York City behind the Museum of Art. There's one that's set up there. And these are massive. I mean, just to move them is unbelievable. If you look on your computers or your smartphones, you can look this up about obelisks, and you're going to see the story about how they move them, what they stand for. And you're going to say, what are they doing here? Anyway, so many people feel that this is the image that Nebuchadnezzar put up. There's a man, you may know him, Irenaeus. I don't know if you ever heard of him. Sometimes they call them the early church fathers. He was somewhat of an apologist he lived from the years 130 AD to 202. He had in his ways, he took on the Gnostics, he took on the Marcionites, who were really putting a hit on Christianity at that time, early time of the church. He made a connection between the Antichrist in Revelation chapter 13 and verse 18, which we're going to go to later, and Nebuchadnezzar in Daniel chapter 3. He said the Antichrist's name will possess the number 666. Okay? Drawing from Revelation 13:8, which talks about where the Apostle John tells you that's going to be the number of his name. All right? He says to count or calculate, that means there's math involved in this. Irenaeus said, since he, the Antichrist, sums up in his own person all the commixture of wickedness which took place previous to the deluge, that's the flood of Noah's time, due to the apostasy of the angels. Now, that's a whole other can of worms. In Genesis chapter 6, it talks about the whole earth being filled with violence. And the angels, through interference with the human race, giants came on the scene, but every kind of evil was all over the earth, and that required the flood, okay? But he's saying that information puts together, it gives you a little bit of a, what do they call it, a modus operandum, I guess, of the Antichrist and how they would work, how they would function. There's a lot of extra information about Genesis chapter 6. You might find that in the book of Enoch. Some people don't count that, but there's some people that think it's very valuable information. It was with the Dead Sea Scrolls, the book of Enoch. Anyway, I think I'm pretty sure that Irenaeus here, who's making his comments, he was aware of that information. An Antichrist character is evident in evil behavior, extremely evil behavior. In his name is his character, okay? The first marker you want to look at that Irenaeus was saying, the first thing you want to do is in Genesis chapter 7 and verse 6, it tells you when this happened, it said Noah was 600 years old when the flood came. Genesis chapter 7 and verse 6. Which says, and Noah was 600 years old when the flood of waters was upon the earth. It's mentioned 2 times in Genesis 7. Verse 6 and verse 11. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, the 17th day of the month, the same day were all the fountains of the great deep broken up, and the windows of heaven were opened. So 600 is the first number that Irenaeus is focusing on. The obelisk that is mentioned in the book of Daniel is 60 cubits high and 6 cubits wide, all right? Now you got to remember what was involved in this. He is wanting people to bow down and pay homage to this image, which in all reality is reflection of you obeying him, which is what he wants worship. And knowing that he is a monster of a guy that completely destroyed a lot of people, took a lot of people captive. That's something to keep in mind here when we're looking at these numbers. Now, some people might think that that's a reach or a stretch with coming up with 666 because of those dimensions. But if you keep in mind that the idolatry is involved in it and an Antichrist type person is involved, And even if you think that's a stretch, if you went to the book of Matthew, chapter 24, of course, Jesus Christ, the greatest prophet that ever lived, Matthew 24. And Matthew 24 is called the Olivet Prophecy. A lot of things that are supposed to happen before his return. Remember, the disciples asked him, when is this going to happen? When are you coming back? What is the sign of the end of the age? There's only two people that are mentioned in Matthew 24. Noah and Daniel. Okay? And it says in Matthew 24, verses 37 to 39, Matthew 24, verses 37 to 39. But as the days of Noah were, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. For as in the days that were before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day that Noah entered into the ark, and knew not until the flood came and took them all away, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. When you hear about the violence that existed back in the days of Noah, the whole marrying and giving in marriage, which is an interesting thing to look up, and look at what's happening right now. All of a sudden, throughout the world, same-sex marriage came on like gangbusters. Everybody's accepting it. Kind of the last ones that got on board was the United States. They kind of tried to hold the line there for a while, but even it caved here. And now we're dealing with choosing whatever you want to be, male or female. My granddaughter just told me at school she just got barked at by one of the furries. And they want to put a cute little name on there, the furries. That's not right behavior. There's something going on big time. So the whole thing with gender blending and same-sex marriage, and it's kind of like the days of Noah. And the other thing that he mentions, that Yeshua mentions in Matthew 24 and verse 15, Matthew 24 and verse 15, when you therefore shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, stand in the holy place. Whoso reads, let him understand. Okay, there's a second sign that the Messiah is telling us you've got to be looking out for. Crazy world conditions, which is happening, absolutely. And the next thing you want to be looking for is an image somewhere, which we will get to in Revelation. Back to Daniel chapter 3. Daniel chapter 3 and verse 2. Then Nebuchadnezzar the king sent to gather together the princes, the governors, and the captains, the judges, the treasurers, the counselors, the sheriffs, and all the rulers of the provinces, to come to the dedication of the image which Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. That word dedication, you're going to know that word. It's Hanukkah, okay? That is another example later on, 160 years before the time of Jesus' birth, that the Maccabees were on the scene. And there was another monster, Antiochus Epiphanes, who went in there and trashed the temple, killed a lot of the Jewish people at that time. So there's a dedication there that's going on, a very false dedication. If you remember in Solomon, when he built the temple, they dedicated that to God. This is dedicated to a man that is acting like he is God, all right? And Daniel chapter 3, verse 4. Then a herald cried aloud, to you it is commanded, O people, nations, and languages. It's not suggested. It's commanded. You have to do this. If you don't, you're going to be put into the fiery furnace, okay? There is no opting out, a religious exemption. It's even more than a mandate. I mean, we went through things recently. Things have been tested. We've been forced. A lot of people have been forced. A lot of people have been pressured. People lost jobs over taking shots. You don't have a right over your body. You could do that with an abortion. There you have a right. But to say I don't want that shot because I don't know if it's safe, some people got fired. I know people that got fired from their jobs. All right. Verse 6. And whoso falleth not down and worshipeth shall the same hour be cast into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. That's your fate if you did not obey him here. Verse 8 is interesting. Verse 8 and verse 12. Wherefore at that time certain Chaldeans came near and accused the Jews. They spoke and said to the king Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever. You, O king, hast made a decree that every man that shall hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, and dulcimer, and all kinds of music, shall fall down and worship the golden image. And whoso falls not down and worshipeth, that he should be cast into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Here's the Gestapo in action here. There are certain Jews whom you have set over affairs of the province of Babylon. He calls them Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, have not regarded thee. They do not serve your gods, nor worship the golden image which you have set up. You can see this sets Nebuchadnezzar into a rage. And that's one of the signs of somebody that's of an Antichrist type attitude. You don't get your way, you get like a crazy person. And he does give the three amigos here a chance to recant, to take it back, to say, well, we really didn't understand. And you notice that there's music involved. I don't know about you, and I try to always factor in youth factors, and I'm thinking back to the 60s, the late 50s, and even the rock and roll. The early days of rock and roll were kind of nothing compared to where we are today. I mean, I hear some of the music. It is satanic. No other word. I mean, it's growling, and the people there that are at the concerts they're in a rage. Even their symbols that they're putting up in the air are satanic. So a lot of times music is involved with Satan worship. So Nebuchadnezzar, he's in a rage, and he said unto the three of them, verse 14, don't you serve my gods, nor worship the golden image which I have set up? Now, if you be ready, I'm not going to repeat all of that, but if you be ready, I'm going to give you another chance to take this all back, and I'll put you back into your jobs. Their answer is amazing. It's an amazing testimony. Verses 16 to 18. I'll call them by their names. Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we are not careful to answer you in this matter. If it be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of thine hand, O king. But if not, be it known unto you, O king, that we will not serve thy gods, nor worship the golden image which you have set up. Of course, verse 19 says, Then was Nebuchadnezzar full of fury. That was the last straw. And he was saying, now you had your opportunity. Now I'm going to show you who's in control here. We're going to read the rest of this story, and I'll just take my time reading it. Starting in verse 19. Then Nebuchadnezzar was full of fury, and the form of his visage was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Therefore he spoke and commanded that they should heat the furnace 7 times more than it was wont to be heated. And he commanded the most mighty men that were in his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and to cast them into the burning fiery furnace. Then these men were bound in their coats, their hosen, and their hats, and their other garments, and were cast into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Therefore, because the king's commandment was urgent, and the furnace was exceedingly hot, the flames of the fire slew those men that took up Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael. And these 3 men fell down bound into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Then Nebuchadnezzar the king was astonished. He rose up in haste and spoke and said unto his counselors, Did not we cast 3 men bound into the midst of the fire? They answered and said unto the king, True, O king. He answered and said, Lo, I see 4 men loose walking in the midst of the fire, and they have no hurt. And the form of the 4th is like the Son of God. Pretty amazing story. So he did answer them. But remember what they said. Even if he doesn't, even if it's our time to lay it down, we're ready. There's a lesson in there for us, for all of us today. All right. Then Nebuchadnezzar came near to the mouth of the burning fiery furnace and spoke and said, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, you servants of the Most High God, come forth and come hither. Then the 3 of them came out of the midst of the fire. And all the princes, governors, and captains, and the king's counselors, being gathered together, saw these men, upon whose body the fire had no power, nor was a hair of their head singed, neither were their coats changed, nor the smell of fire had passed on them. Then Nebuchadnezzar spoke and said, Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants that trusted in him, and have changed the king's word, and yielded their bodies, that they might not serve nor worship any god except their own God. Therefore I make a decree, that every people, nation, and language which spake anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut in pieces, and their houses shall be made a dunghill, because there is no other God that can deliver after this sort. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. So after he was proved wrong, then he starts schmoozing, gets the guys back into their position, makes a decree. And you know the rest of the story in Daniel. Eventually he goes out of his mind. He's out in the field eating grass like a wild animal, which shows you what can happen to people under the influence, and which could show you, like I mentioned, some of the other maniac tyrants. Antiochus Epiphanes, which was 167 before the year of Christ's birth. And then you have Titus and Vespasian, I believe it is, in 70 A.D., coming into Jerusalem and destroying the place and killing. If you read any of Josephus's accounts, some of the numbers are unbelievable. How many people were killed, crucified. The gold that came out of the temple, when they burned the place, that gold was used to build the Colosseum. Pretty amazing things. These guys are all on a anti-God ego trip. What does that have to do with us today? What I read to you, the first scripture we read was in Romans chapter 15 and verse 4, which says, those stories, those messages that are in the scriptures are there for us today. We're going to go to Revelation chapter 13. Something that's supposed to happen And I guess we're all aware there are people that are jockeying for position in this world right now, talking about a new world order, talking about a one world order. Very powerful people, more powerful than presidents, very wealthy people. And sometimes you hear some of their comments, it's frightening what they say. So anyway, behind the scenes, in Revelation chapter 12, which is a page before that, in verse 9, it mentions, "And the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, which deceives the whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him." He's called the serpent, the deceiver that deceives the whole world. There's a line from a song that goes, "Meet the new boss, same as the old boss." So when you're seeing these episodes of Antichrist actions going on throughout history, realize that there is a spiritual power behind it. What's happening right now in the world, Jonathan Cahn has a book out right now. I think it's called Return of the Gods. And he's talking about all those false named gods are back on the scene in the form of demons infecting people. We are told in God's word that the battles that we deal with are spiritual. There are wicked spirits behind a lot of the things we see. The random killings, people just going off anywhere and just letting loose. That's demonic. That's not natural behavior. So we are in a time of that same type of acts that happened back in Noah's time, in the time of Rome. And of course, Rome was supposed to be on the scene till the end here. Of course, it talks about the stone cut out without hands that hits the image on its feet, the feet that are made of iron and clay. Some people think that the iron and clay possibly is referring to demons mixed with clay. Of course, we are clay. We're made of the dust of the earth, which could be another interesting thing to think about. But many theories about the mark, the name, the number of the beast. I think we better read this first. Revelation chapter 13, verses 11 to 18. "And I beheld another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had 2 horns like a lamb, but he spoke like a dragon. He exercises all the power of the first beast before him, and causes the earth and them which dwell therein to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed. And he does great works, so that he makes fire come down from heaven on the earth in the sight of men. And he deceives them that dwell on the earth by the means of those miracles which he had power to do in the sight of the beast, saying to them that dwell on the earth, that they should make an image to the beast, which had the wound by a sword and did live. And he had power to give life unto the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak, and cause that as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed. Much like what we read back in the time of Daniel. And he causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads. The adversary does not discriminate. You could be rich, you could be poor, you could be whatever race you are. He wants to take out everybody. Verse 17, "And that no man might buy or sell, save he that has the mark, or the name of the beast, or the number of his name. Here is wisdom. Let him that hath understanding count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666, hence the 666. Sometimes there's all kind of ideas about who the beast is. And a lot of people do things with numbers. They say every letter has a numerical value. And something that Daniel Joseph said, he said, I probably, with a little bit of, not too much fudging, could probably say half of you in the room here qualify to be the beast with doing the number thing and the addition. But the bigger question is, what causes you to get the number? Not who is the beast. What causes you to get that number? There's 3 witnesses. Actually, there's more. I'm going to just take you to 3 of them. 3 witnesses that tell you how to earn that mark. How to get, if there's a mark of the beast, there's also a mark of God. We're going to turn to the book of Exodus, chapter 13. Exodus chapter 13 and verse 9. Wrong book here. Exodus 13 and verse 9. And it shall be for a sign unto thee upon your hand, and for a memorial between your eyes. That word sign means mark. That the Lord's law may be in thy mouth, for with a strong hand hath the Lord brought thee out of Egypt. God's law needs to be on your right hand and between the frontlets of your eyes. It's in your brain, how you think, how you do your work. The second witness to that would be Deuteronomy chapter 6. Deuteronomy chapter 6 and verse 8. It's talking about God's law, about teaching them to your children. And thou shalt bind them for a sign upon your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. In Deuteronomy chapter 11, verse 18. Deuteronomy 11 and verse 18. Therefore shall you lay up these my words in your heart and in your soul, and bind them for a sign upon your hand, that they may be as frontlets between your eyes. Here it's telling you that it should be in your heart. You know, the new covenant, the law of God's going to be written on your heart. You're going to love God's law. It's not a drag or a punishment to keep that law. We're supposed to be growing to love that law, living by it, teaching our children it. And I didn't even talk about the other places when it talks about God's Sabbath day. It is a sign between you and I, between God and us, that we are His special people. It's a mark. It's God's mark. So you got the beast's mark, and you have God's mark. What are some of the things that we can do as we are entering these times? Right now with our Bible study group, we're going through the 7 churches of Revelation. We've done that already at Angelo's house. That is a great way to examine. Those are messages to the churches of God. You're going to see some attaboys. You're going to see some where you're failing. You'll be able to look through those messages and you're going to say, well, I could relate to that. But one of the first things, you lost your first love. That was the church at Ephesus. Losing their first love. How you first felt when you learned this exciting truth. For many of us, it's back in the 70s. It was such an exciting time. The reality of being forgiven, a new lease on life, getting washed clean, baptized, always learning about the Sabbath day, the holy days, a whole new way of life. But we all know what happened. 1995 came along, people scattered, went back into everything that they had proven to be true. They went right back into the world. What a sad commentary that is. And now many of the believers are scattered. There's some bigger groups, smaller groups, still trucking, still trying to stay on board with what they proved. So you could look at some of those things that happened to those church groups, and you notice one of the big things, there's muddling or a tolerating idolatry, tolerating Jezebel, tolerating Balaam to eat food sacrificed to idols. Here again, idolatry involved. And it's so easy to say, that's no big deal. It is a big deal. It's a big deal to our Creator. Because I know in the book of Deuteronomy, he tells us he doesn't want mixed religion. He doesn't want you to take into things that are false and pagan and bring it into worshiping him. Matter of fact, he talks about destroying altars and pagan symbols. We don't destroy them. We put them up all over the place, and we're amazed to go and even pay to go see them sometimes, I think. Not what he wants. So that's one thing you can do, especially as we're getting ready for Passover, Days of Unleavened Bread. See where you need change in your life. See if maybe you tolerate too much. I see in some of the Church of God circles, I see things that are tolerated. I think, whoa. I know 40 years ago, no way that would have happened. I see it now. Something to keep in mind. Getting that first love. Trying to avoid lukewarmness. That's a big problem. Most of the time we got one foot in the world, one foot in the church. That's not where we're supposed to be. He wants us hot. He doesn't want us cold or lukewarm. He really wants us hot. And another way of doing that is encouraging one another. Malachi chapter 3 and verse 16. Malachi chapter 3 and verse 16. And these are things that you can make happen. There's a lot of bad uses of the technology out there, but there's a lot of good uses. I mean, some of our phones that we have, some of the Skyping, you're able to stay in contact with one another. Even a lot of times because there's a lot of distance between us, physical distance, But if you use some of the technology for a good purpose, like we do that with these Bible studies we have, you got people down in Florida, North Carolina, South Carolina, Maryland, and it's amazing. And it's sharing God's Word. Don't always agree 100%. Sometimes there's little ideas, but we iron that out. And it's definitely iron sharpening iron. It really goes a long way. Malachi 3 and verse 16. Then they that feared the Lord spoke often one to another, and the Lord hearkened and heard it, and a book of remembrance was written before him for them that feared the Lord, and that thought upon his name. That book of remembrance, it's called the book of life. There's quite a few scriptures that talk about that book. You need to be written in that book of life. Revelation 13:8 mentions that. It's that same chapter we were in talking about the Antichrist. Revelation 13 verse 8, which says, 13 and verse 8, and all that dwell upon the earth shall worship him. That's talking about the Antichrist, the lawless one, whose names are not written in the book of life of the Lamb, slain from the foundation of the world. We need to be written in that book. And there is the separating factor, and something that is being preached by many Christian churches today. You don't need that old law. That law's been done away. Nothing further from the truth. And the words of the Messiah, he says, don't think I came to do away with the law or the prophets. I came not to do away, but to fulfill. He kicks it up. He takes it to a higher way of thinking, a spiritual way of thinking. And it needs to be written on our hearts and in our minds. Hebrews 10 and verse 25. Hebrews 10 and verse 25. Don't forsake the assembling of ourselves together, as the manner of some is, but exhorting one another, and so much the more as you see the day approaching. I think we're seeing the day approaching. You know, this country, in 2 years, has been destroyed. It's unbelievable what could happen in 2 years. And we got 2 more to go. And you can't look to a man to fix this. I think in some ways we have exactly what we deserve. You could tell by what people accept all over the place. Everybody's saying, I'm okay, you're okay, we're all okay. No, we're all a mess. The country is a mess, and it's in big turmoil. The world is in a serious trouble right now. You don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. You know, there's so many threatenings going on, and threatenings of war, and there is pestilence. We just went through pestilence not too long ago. There's famine. I hear some of you hear from Bill Goff, some of the brethren over in Kenya. They died of starvation in the past year. Tough times. A lot of times we have a hard time relating here. Sometimes I go to the grocery stores, I can't imagine people not having food. I look at our stores, just what we throw away in the stores has to be absolutely abominable. Anyway, that's what we need to do. We need to be encouraging one another and not forsaking the assembling together. Ephesians chapter 6, we're not going to turn there. Verses 11 through 18, that's talking about the armor of God. You need to have that armor on, all of it. Helmet of salvation, feet shod with the gospel, the good news. And of course, the greatest message you can receive of all comes from the Master. And he tells us, there's no greater love that any man can show than to lay down his life for his friends. He laid down his life for every one of us. And he tells us to bear one another's burdens. Greatest message that he gave to all of us is to love one another. And you can't be tuned out on the sidelines. Most of your time spent in the world, not even wanting to get together on the Sabbath day and on the holy days. You got to take advantage of all these good things that he has provided. And if you can't, use the technology that's out there to study together, to pray together. I think we have some growing to do in that thing of praying together. It sounds a little awkward. Sometimes people are a little put off by it. I'm not saying that you go and blab every sin you committed in your life. You got to be a little wise about that. But to share your faults maybe where you need some help, where you need brothers and sisters that are going to help you up, not stomp on you when you're down. But as we are entering these most interesting times, could be maybe the start of the Great Tribulation, could be the time of Jacob's trouble. We are here. Definitely, things are happening. So this is not a downer message. This is an encouraging message. We can learn from Hananiah, Azariah, Mishael. Daniel was thrown in with the lions. These guys were tough guys. Most of the disciples, the apostles, they were all killed. When you signed on, when you signed up for this journey and accepted Yeshua as your Messiah, your perfect Lamb of God, your life is required. Not saying that every one of us are going to be martyred or killed, but we don't know what's coming our way. And you have to, in your mind, remember he does tell you, he will give you words, the words you're going to need if you're ever really called out. But have that faith and learn to love God's law so that when that time comes when somebody says, hey, you're going to worship this, you can say, hit the highway. It's not happening. No way. And we have to have that kind of faith within us. And how do you get that faith? It's like Yeshua said, if a man loves me, he will keep my words. And my Father and I will come and make our home within you. You don't get any more authority than that. The Father and Son living inside of you. He will get us through just like he was in that furnace with those 3 guys. He lives inside of you. You are the temple. You are the dwelling place. And he will see us through the tough times that are to come. I said to you earlier that this could be like we're going to have a little Bible study after announcements and some music. And maybe you have some ideas about the mark of the beast. One other thing I want to tell you. I watched Tomorrow's World last night. Tomorrow's World is presented by the Living Church of God, one of the groups that were part of the Church of God, Worldwide Church of God. The program was called, Do You Have the Mark of the Beast? I'll tell you what a program. It is a message that could get you killed. That's how powerful it was. It's worth taking a look at. You could find it on your phones or your computers. But that might be an interesting subject when we're done, okay? Thank you.